Welcome back, everyone. Michael here with Offshore Citizen. I'm going to talk to you today about the theory that comes from a book that was recommended by a few of our viewers. I'm going to highly recommend it to really all of you. I think that it's, well, let's put it this way. Eric Weinstein, who's a very, very smart guy, on his Twitter, put up some post, whatever it was, a couple days ago or something, asking for who is it who has the mental model or theory that most accurately describes or best understands what's going on in our world today. And I would say the authors of this book are those people. So we're going to talk today about the book, The Sovereign Individual, their theories, and yeah, I just highly recommend you guys go and get a copy of it. It's a really good book, much better than I would have thought of by the title. Has a lot reminiscent of Sapiens. If you have read the book Sapiens, fantastic book, very, very good. And this has like a bunch of parts that are reminiscent of that, but more kind of prediction looking. So we're going to talk about it today. Let's dive in. If you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the all notifications. If you'd like help with the things we talk about here, which are international tax planning, tax optimization, asset protection, forming companies, opening bank accounts, moving abroad, getting residencies, getting second citizenships, official programs, unofficial programs, residency and citizenship by investment, etc., you can book a call with me, calendar.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below, or send a message to our websites, offshorecitizen.net, offshorecapitalist.com. Okay, so The Sovereign Individual, great book, great book. To give you some ideas, so this book was written in 1997. A more recent publication has the foreword written by Peter Thiel, who was one of the co-founders of PayPal. He's the founder of Palantir, very successful, first investor into Facebook, very contrarian investor, wrote the book 0 to 1, has some really interesting thoughts. Definitely very interested of ways to listen to what Peter Thiel has to say, whether he's accurate or not. I think that he has, because he's contrarian, it's different sorts of thoughts, which is excellent. So if you just consider, now this book, again, like I said, written in 1997, what things did they predict? They predicted the rise of nationalism. They predicted the rise of postmodernism. They predicted cryptocurrencies. They predicted the decrease in inter-country violence and the increase in kind of like a lot of the chaos and intra stuff going in there. They predicted, let's see here, what else? The rise of Americans renouncing their citizenship, the rise of offshore, etc. So they got some things wrong. I would say that they were overly bullish on the extent to which people could relocate money and business to tax havens. Realistically, what they found, they also predicted the pandemic, which is like crazy. Now, they didn't predict it like to the date or whatever, but they specifically talk about this and restrictions on travel and government's desires to restrict people's travel and why they would do that, etc. So super fascinating. Their whole model, and one of the things that I always love mental models, I love when people kind of have models of the world and how they work, is based around the idea of conceptualizing that there's returns on violence. And what are the returns on violence and how does that drive society-wide behaviors? And kind of looking at these various different, another thing they talked about that it was quite weird to read about in retrospect is Y2K. Y2K was kind of a bizarre thing they talked about. But anyway, good example of something that they're all mentioning about how the information age is going to come and change things. And their basic theory is that for the last about 500 years, there has been a payoff to large-scale violence, which has incentivized countries to build larger and larger militaries, which basically peaked with the US and the Soviet Union competing in the Cold War. That was kind of like the peak, right? And the collapse of the Berlin Wall was, they would say, something very, very significant, not so much for just what it indicated for Soviet Union, but what it indicated in terms of the shift that was about to happen and is now happening. And they suggest that kind of the idea of the nation state will gradually crumble, that politics will cease to become as important as it is today, and it's all due to these payoffs, which is really, really an interesting theory, and again, kind of you can follow through and follow it along. So I quite like it. Some of the things that they talk about are basically the idea that as we have more and more in an information society, we're going to be in a situation where you have less and less ability for the government to enforce rules. And because of that, governments are going to try to wildly clamp down. People are going to be, like we talk about here, more location independent. They're going to be able to have their assets elsewhere. Those assets are going to be able to be outside of government control, et cetera, et cetera. And it's going to take very small numbers of people to have very big impact, and therefore gathering huge numbers of people will not be so valuable, and therefore small nations rather than large nations are actually going to have some of the biggest payoffs. They have this really, really interesting explanation where they describe how essentially, what is a government? A government is an organization with a monopoly on violence. Therefore, if you think about it from the perspective of a corporation, a country is a protection service provider. And in this model, you can say, okay, if we have a company which is providing services for protection, then who are the citizens? Are they the proprietor? Are they the employees? Are they the clients? And proprietors would be an example of something like in a kingdom, a monarchy, right? So we have a few countries still with that going on, but not many. Then you have kind of what a lot of people would say is, oh, hey, we're the clients, we're the government's clients. And they're like, no, actually that's probably not true. And the way that we know that that's not true is if the citizens are the clients, then their incentive is to drive down the costs. So they want to vote to drive costs down all the time. Actually, what's happening is the people are employees of the government by and large. And this is through welfare systems, it's through healthcare, it's through education, it's through actually being government employees. And the incentive of employees is to drive costs up because government spending equals their wages. And that incentive structure is all going to change because when the most valuable people can relocate easily and relocate their assets easily, you're going to be in a situation where they can basically dictate like customers to countries, which is super interesting, right? Now we've seen kind of attempts by governments around the world with automatic exchange of information, with global minimum tax, et cetera, to try and use this cartel-like approach to restrict those individuals. And certainly there will probably be more and more of that, right? Their argument is that in the big picture that will fail. In the short run it will be quite brutal and kind of semi-violent, violent in a different sort of way. But over the long term, it's just something that's untenable for these countries. And increasingly it will become obvious that the returns that are being provided don't make any sense. And they give examples of saying how, think about this, that the customers who use the services the most pay the least for it. For example, people on welfare, people, et cetera, they pay no taxes, but they're getting the most services. Whereas the people who are paying the most use the least services. And that it makes a lot of sense if somebody is paying, $50,000 a year, there's no way the government's providing them more than $50,000 a year of value. And as a result, it's not a balanced equation. Now, of course, the counter argument is, well, hang on a second. If you build wealth in a society, then you have all this advantage that you've gained that is not just located in what you personally receive, right? The customers that you have are providing value to you. The suppliers that you have are providing value to you. The employees that you have are providing value, et cetera. But the problem is, increasingly, you can separate yourself from a lot of that and just not partake. So that becomes a really, just a really interesting dynamic. So that's about the book. I'm not going to kind of ruin it for you or whatever, but I wanted to mention it because it is super interesting, super fascinating. A bunch of things, they go through a bunch of the history of the Middle Ages and why the church first became significant and why it fell in the end, and the printing press and how that's kind of allegorical or metaphorical to what's going on today, and all these parallels and similarities. Super interesting. So highly recommend it. For those of you who recommended the book to me, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. There's a few of you who did. I know a bunch of you have read it, and yeah, it's a really, really good book. Like I said, they don't get everything right, but as a mental model to think about the future, I think it is very, very fascinating, very interesting, and deserves mention. So we'll see. Maybe I'll have my team reach out and we may see if we can interview the authors, because that would be kind of fun. Hope that helps. If you have any questions or any suggestions for future videos, please give this a thumbs up, put it in the comments below. Would love to hear from you, and I'm going to look forward to seeing you guys on the next video.